The Pittsburgh Steelers have won 4 of their last 6 games, 4 of their last 6 since the bye week. But a lot of Steelers fans will tell you that's a bad thing. They've cost themselves a potential top 10, even top 5 pick. I'm here to tell you that they're wrong. The Steelers and the improvements that they've made are far worth the potential top 5 pick they could have gotten had this team continued losing since the bye week. We'll talk about that today on Steeler Country. All right, welcome to Steeler Country. I am Tony Serino. Those of you who follow the channel, I apologize. I've been gone for, let's say, about 6 weeks. Really, we're talking about the bye week. It's about when I took my vacation from the channel. And so I'm back. Hey, I'm back, everybody. But we have a lot to get to, right? Because the last 6 weeks have been really interesting for the Pittsburgh Steelers. As I said in that intro, they've won 4 of their last 6 games. Their playoff bubble right now, I think there's an outside chance that they make it. I'm not going to sit here today and say there's no chance because, it was 12 months ago that they were sitting at around, what was it, like a 15% chance that last week of the year they needed the Jaguars to beat the Colts. That happened. They made the playoffs. So I suppose anything is possible. But let's talk about this kind of, this thinking that's going around Pittsburgh. And you've heard this on AFC North Talk as well, right? My co-hosts are kind of very happy that the Steelers have entered into this little winning streak or, this improvement since the bye week, because it has taken them from what could have been a top 5 pick to what's likely now going to be more of a, let's say, a top 15 type of pick. Well, but is that worth it, right? I mean, like the improvements the Steelers have made over the past month and the reason why they're winning football games, has that been worth the potential loss of a top 5 or top 10 pick? And I've said this since the bye, and I apologize if you've heard me say this on AFC North Talk, but I want to do a video today, which is when we're expanding on this thought process, which is I think the Steelers and the improvements they made specifically on the offensive side, I think this is worth, the Steelers could end up with the 30th overall pick in the draft, and I'd be completely fine with it, given the improvements we've seen on the offensive side. When we got to the bye week, the Steelers were 2-6. And there were a lot of fans writing me saying, Tony, you're wrong about this team being a 4 or 5 win team. They're going to go on a run. They're going to win a bunch of games after the bye. Their schedule is going to get easier. They're going to win a bunch of games. They could even, make the playoffs. And I said to those fans at the time, that's fine. I'm fine with them winning a bunch of games. As long as that is the reason that they're winning these football games is because of a dramatic improvement to the offensive side of the ball. If this winning streak had been about TJ Watt came back, the pass rush was dominant again, they started forcing turnovers, giving the offense easy touchdowns or easy short drives, who cares, right? Again, why would this team winning defensively be a good thing for this team long term? What this team needed was for this offense to dramatically improve, to start to be the reason why they're winning football games and stop being the reason really why they're losing football games. Because at the end of the day, what no one wants to talk about with the 2022 Steelers is that this defense, while it has a solid core, I mean, we know TJ Watt, Minkah Fitzpatrick, even Cam Hayward, right? That is a solid core of players. Around the edges, I mean, this is a team that's, look, I don't know what you want to call it, rebuild, retooling. Something's going to happen to this defense at the end of this year. Let me illustrate for a second what I'm talking about. And I'll share a document that I put together to illustrate this. This is the starting offense and defense for the 2022 Steelers. In fact, these are the top 50 by snap count on each side of the ball. So you'll see on the red, the players marked in red there, these are players who are not under contract for 2023. These are all players who, if the Steelers want to bring these guys back, they're going to have to be re-signed. So when I talk about I need the offense to improve, the reason for that is these guys, this offense as it exists today, this is locked up. I mean, they're not going out and getting a new quarterback after this year. We're locked into Kenny Pickett. So either Kenny Pickett starts to look like an NFL caliber quarterback, or this offense is going to be pretty bad for about 4 or 5 years, right? Because Kenny Pickett likely is going to be here for the entirety of his rookie contract and potentially even that fifth-year option. You talk about Najee Harris and that running game, what we saw in those first 10 weeks of the season. Boy, that was rough. I mean, they're talking about a guy who, again, a first-round pick, going to be here for the next 4 years, likely going to have his fifth-year option picked up. If we were talking about today, are we sure about Kenny Pickett? Are we sure about Najee Harris? There's no, oh, well, we're going to, the Steelers can just retool and get a new quarterback or get a new running back. This is year 2. This is year 1 of these players. Same thing at tight end. Same thing at wide receiver. And then even on the offensive line, I know we all want to improve the Steelers offensive line. There's room for improvement on that offensive line. But all these guys are here. I mean, the Steelers signed James Daniels to a long-term deal. They signed Chuks Okorafor to a long-term deal. Dan Moore is still on his rookie contract, as is Kevin Dotson, and Mason Cole's here on, I think, a 2 or 3 year deal. Right? But if we're talking about this offense being so bad that Omar Khan and Andy Weidl had to go into the offseason and make it a priority to upgrade positions on this offense, look at what they also have to do defensively. Right? I mean, at the end of the day, I understand that the salary cap is malleable and that you can kind of extend guys and move money around. But at the end of the day, it really is a fixed pie, right? I mean, yes, you can, it's a malleable pie, let's say. Right? But then at the end of the day, you only have so many resources to work with. There's only so much money you can move around. So any money that they had to spend, any draft capital that they had to spend, retooling an offense that they thought was already set, is things that they couldn't do defensively. When we talk about, hey, this defensive line needs to get retooled. Yeah, damn right it does. Because Chris Wormley's not going to be here next year. In all likelihood, Larry Ogunjobi's not going to be here. And by the way, Tyson Alualu isn't going to be here either. And so you're talking about, when we fast forward to 2023, and by the way, I have this, you can look at, okay, maybe they could just promote Isaiah Loudermilk and DeMarvin Leal. But do you think that this defense, the way it's built, and how this team is built to be a dominant defensive team, is it a dominant defensive lineup if the Steelers have to spend draft capital, salary cap space next year to improve an offense, which means that, well, we're just gonna roll the dice with Loudermilk and Leal on that defensive line? Does that keep the Steelers where they need to be defensively? That's why I've been so impressed, right? This is why I've been so impressed with what the Steelers have done offensively over the past 6 weeks. Because at the end of the day, let's start with the offensive line. The offensive line is not great just yet, but they're very, very young. I think the thing a lot of Steeler fans forget about this offensive line is the Steelers didn't go out and sign a bunch of vets. I mean, these aren't guys that are long in the tooth. You look at what the Bengals did, and they went out and got guys like Lyle Collins. Lyle Collins is very long in the tooth. I mean, I don't know how much longer Lyle Collins is going to be at Cincinnati Bengals past this season. So while they got some good reps out of him, they're still, at the end of the day, they're still going to have a need at right tackle. When you look at the Steelers and the offensive line, I guess we should bring it back up here. These are all players who are 26 or younger. The vast majority of this offensive line is still on their rookie deals. Now you look at Dan Moore, still on his rookie deal. Kevin Dotson, well, I guess three of them are on the first year of their next deal, right? But again, these are all players who are, none of them are signed to big deals. So they're not taking up a bunch of cap space. They're all young and growing. You look at what Dan Moore was back in preseason. Think about what we were saying about Dan Moore in preseason and week 1 and early parts of the year. I mean, it was a disaster. Holy cow, they got to get rid of this guy. But what started to happen throughout the year, and we saw this last year as well, is as this line comes together, Dan Moore's playing much better. I think from the middle to the right, Mason Cole, James Daniels, Chuks Okorafor. I mean, I don't think there's the only way you're gonna make the argument that Andy Weidl or Omar Khan should upgrade at any of those positions is if you have a can't miss knockout, like you could get the next Creed Humphrey, right? Maybe they get like a Creed Humphrey type at center. It's like, this guy's an all-pro. This guy you can't miss. Okay, then upgrade at center. But otherwise, I think Mason Cole is just fine. I think James Daniels been very good. Very good as a run blocker and has not allowed a sack as a pass blocker. And Okorafor, well, once again, not an elite right tackle. It's been just fine. So I think what's happened to the offensive line over the last 6 weeks, as this team has really come together, is they've moved the offensive line from a need to a want. I would like for Andy Weidl and Omar Khan to improve this offensive line in the offseason. But if the Steelers have a top 15 pick, and you're telling me that they could have the third best offensive lineman in next year's draft, with that 15th pick. But they could have the best corner, right? Let's say that the number one corner is there, or the number one D lineman is there, or even the number one linebacker is there. Are we still at the end of the day prioritizing? No. We have to improve. We have to continue to invest in this offensive line at the expense of potentially getting a number one corner or the next Cam Hayward on that defensive line. Is that where we are right now? I don't think we are. I think I'm at a point right now where, sure, if a great tackle falls to the Steelers, let's all for it, right? I mean, you can certainly upgrade over Dan Moore. You can certainly upgrade over Kevin Dotson. Yeah, I mean, I would even make the argument, like I said, you can upgrade over Mason Cole if you needed to. But it's no longer a requirement for me. And what is a requirement, I mean, as you look at this, we'll go back to this, right? There's going to need to be capital spent to reinvigorate this defense. You're going to go into 2023 with a defensive line room that is going to be Cam Hayward, Montravius Adams, Isaiah Loudermilk, and DeMarvin Leal. And that's a lot of young talent, but that's a lot of young talent that really hasn't gotten on the field very often. I mean, how many weeks in the beginning portions of this year was Isaiah Loudermilk not even given a hat? So I don't think the Steelers can go into 23 saying, well, yeah, Loudermilk is our new, he's the new Chris Wormley. I think potentially Leal and what we start to see out of him, because he started the year as this specialty pass rusher. They like to use him at edge a little bit. And that's been nice to see. But he could potentially go into next season. You could imagine him as that first guy off the bench. I think the Steelers need to go out. They need to prioritize getting new starters on that defensive line. And then guys like Leal and Loudermilk at this portions of their career are still kind of going to be rotation guys. And then as we kind of phase out Cam Hayward, you phase in Leal. But then you look at that corner room. Cam Sutton is potentially going to need to be re-signed. And even if you do let's say you do re-sign Cam Sutton, I think there's still an argument to be made that you should probably bring in a young corner to develop beyond, to be that either a true number one or at least the number two behind Cam Sutton. Because certainly, Levi Wallace not long for this team. He is under contract for next season, but I don't imagine that Levi Wallace is going to be here, 3-4 years from now. And at nickel, Arthur Maulet, I understand that Mike Tomlin likes Arthur Maulet, but that's another position where you could upgrade. Terrell Edmonds has been very good for this team, and I would imagine that they're going to bring Terrell Edmonds back because they really don't have anyone on the roster right now at all. And I don't think the Steelers want to spend a bunch of capital having to go and get another safety, given that they've already given up draft capital to get Minkah, and now they've just signed him to a big deal. But linebacker is another position of like, okay, Bush is gone in all likelihood. I imagine they'll bring back Spillane, but I don't think Robert Spillane is the kind of player that the Steelers are going to want to start. And I had this talk with Dave over at Steelers Sanctuary on today's podcast. You can listen to that Steelers Sanctuary podcast. Find that wherever you find podcasts. He and I talked about the edge rushing position. I still think the third edge rusher. You look at what Malik Reed has done this year, and kind of the revolving door that was that third edge rusher spot throughout the year. That's still got to be a priority. So again, it's been really nice to see this improvement offensively, and let's go over that improvement on the offensive side of the ball, because I have some numbers to back this up. I mean, just how improved this offense has been since the bye. So let's go back. Let's take a trip back to where we were at the bye week. Because remember, this team going into the bye was 2-6. And boy, it was dire on the offensive side of the ball. Yes, we got to see Kenny Pickett, but going into the bye, that was right after the Eagles game. You had pretty much 3 games in a row of Kenny Pickett where it did not look good. That Buffalo game, you could make the argument, okay, they didn't put up a ton of points, but, Kenny looked fine. Maybe a little too much check down in that game. It was very clearly like a yards, not points type of scenario. Against Miami, just inefficient. And then at the end of the game, just trying to force things that weren't there. Bad interceptions at the end of that one. And then the Eagles game, I thought the biggest problem for Kenny in that Eagles game was that he started to kind of devolve back into college Kenny, which was like YOLO. I'm getting out of every pocket. I'm just trying to make things happen on the move. It was bad. I mean, you can see it here. So this is EPA per play, expected points. So the way expected points is measured is if you take the whole history of the National Football League, given a certain spot, when the ball, well, let's say a team has the ball 1st and 10 at the 50-yard line at home. What does the average drive end in? How many points does that average drive end in? That's your expected points. So your expected points added are, okay, given the result of a play, your expected points were, let's say, 3, and then because of the result of the play, now your expected points are 4. You added 1 point for that play. I mean, I'm sure there's certainly better explanations of this out there. So give it, Google it, EPA, expected points. But I think it's a very good measurement of efficiency in the National Football League. This is the Steelers on an EPA per play basis, offensively and defensively. So the x-axis is offense, the y-axis is defense. So let's just pay attention to the x-axis, right? Because again, what happened defensively, as we saw, there's going to be some changes defensively for sure. But here's where the Steelers entered the bye week as far as EPA per play. The Steelers were at the time, 1, 2, 3, 4, the 5th worst offense in the National Football League, right there with Denver and Washington as, one of the worst offenses in the National Football League. That's where we were going into the bye. Now, a couple things happened at the bye. The biggest one is the one I talked about with the last video here on the channel, the trade of Chase Claypool. Great trade, unbelievable trade. Omar Khan, this guy, first of all, he put together the Minka deal early on. He got the Deontay deal done, and then he makes this trade. He's making a little legend for himself already, even kind of still in the shadow of Kevin Colbert. But that trade was huge, not only for the draft capital that they were able to get, but it also, I think, had an effect on Matt Canada and the way that he ran the offense. And look, can't prove this, but I also think that there was a lot of self-scouting in that bye week. I think, for all the crap that I've given Matt Canada, the one thing I'll give him credit for in that bye week was looking back to what went wrong here. Why are the Steelers a top 5, or a bottom 5, I should say, offense in the NFL? And what are the things that they can improve on? And how can this offense be more efficient going forward? I think one of the things he clearly recognized was that this team needed to go with more of a heavy personnel, more of a 12 personnel, especially in a world without Chase Claypool. Now, potentially, the loss of Claypool, added to that, right? I mean, the Steelers went from having this kind of plethora of talent at wide receiver, given that they had Deontay, Pickens, and Claypool. And boy, you don't want to take any of those guys off the field, and you'd have to do that if you're going to use 2 tight ends. But also, I think it helped out the running game. And this is a team, remember, that has been built for the last 2 years. All we've been told as Steeler fans for the past 2 seasons, that this team is going to run the ball and play defense. That's the winning mentality. That's the winning formula for these Pittsburgh Steelers. Run the ball, play defense. I mean, it's old 90s style, Cowher style football. And finally, post-bye week, it's come true. The Steelers have been able to run the football with relative consistency. And defensively, and we'll talk about the defense later. But let's stick with this, right? So, okay, so this is pre-bye week. This is the Steelers post-bye week. Again, I'll show that again. Watch the x-axis here. The Steelers are, as one of the worst offenses in the National Football League post-bye, they are one of the best offenses in the National Football League since the bye week. In fact, they're the 8th best offense in the NFL. They actually overlap with the Bengals. How crazy is this? The Steelers, on a per-play basis, have been as efficient as the Migos themselves, Joe Burr and the crew. Now, do I think the Steelers have as good an offense right now as the Cincinnati Bengals? No, I do not. No, I do. Obviously, the Bengals can reach a level right now that the Steelers only dream of. But I do think that, again, when we're talking about efficiency per play, this is more, this is also a measure of consistency. Because the Bengals have kind of been this roller coaster ride at times this season. The Steelers, since the bye week, really have not. I mean, they've kind of been very level in each game. Even the one game where they just could not run the football against Baltimore, you saw the passing game improve. And while, the turnovers killed them in the game, when we're just talking about on a per play basis, the Steelers were actually very, very good. in that game offensively. Just 3 of those plays were out and out disasters. But you see here, I mean, this is a drastic improvement. And this is what the Steelers need. The Steelers need to finish this season as, you know, as a far improved offense. They can build on this going forward. They're not going to go into this offseason and change out at quarterback and change out at running back and change out at wide receiver and change out at tight end. They could certainly add to that offensive line, but I would imagine that the 2023 offensive line is going to have what? Maximum 1 new starter? How many starters do you think are going to change year over year from the 2022 offensive line to the 2023 offensive line? In fact, let's bring that back up again. You tell me, how many starters are going to change, period, from that offense? Because I would say right now, 2, max 2. I could see them. Obviously, I could see Steven Sims being changed out for Calvin Austin next season. And I could see them potentially changing an offensive lineman. I think left guard is the most obvious spot that could happen. Because Dotson, I think, has been the worst offensive lineman the Steelers have had this year. Obviously, there's a chance they could upgrade over Dan Moore as well. But then you look over to that defensive side. I mean, you could have 4 or 5 new starters easily could have 4 or 5 new starters, because even the guys who are coming back, right? I mean, again, I'm not sitting here going to tell you that Levi Wallace is a lock to be a starter next year. Nor would I tell you that Arthur Maulet is a lock to be a starter next year. So even if the Steelers were to bring back, let's say, Cam Sutton, you know, I think they could still change out both of the other corners. And again, and when you live in a world where there's only so much draft capital to be had, there's only so much salary cap to be given out. When you have all the changes you need to make defensively, boy, this offense better start getting good. Because, you know, Chris Carter said this the other, I talked to him about this on Locked On Steelers a couple weeks ago. You know, he said, look, the Steelers are far away from being a 30-point-a-game offense. I think that's undeniable, right? I mean, the Steelers do not look like anytime soon they're going to be, you know, the killer bees or anything like that. But I don't think it's the personnel. It's just growth. It's development. Right? It's Kenny Pickett becoming a starting caliber player. It's Najee Harris rounding into form as one of the better backs in the league. It's this offensive line rounding into form. You know, what we're starting to see from this offensive line is that they're creeping up towards what? What would you call them? A league average type of offensive line? Which offensive line would you rather have right now? Would you rather have the Steelers offensive line, or would you rather have the Bengals offensive line? Given everything we know, right? The fact that the Steelers offensive line is all 26 or younger, they're on relatively easy contracts, or rookie deals. Or would you rather have an offensive line where the Bengals invested a ton of money into that line, into a guy like La'el Collins and Alex Kappa and Ted Karras, right? And they still have Jonah Williams. Which offensive line would you rather have right now? Because I got to tell you, the fact that it's even close, right? The fact that the Bengals went out in the offseason and invested a ton of capital into an offensive line. The Steelers have not yet. The Steelers have what? Kevin Dotson, 4th-round pick. Dan Moore, 4th-round pick. Mason Cole, bargain deal. Chuks Okorafor, again, I wouldn't say necessarily a bargain deal, but certainly a very team-friendly deal. And James Daniels, who I think makes the most of anyone on that offensive line, is still, they didn't break the bank. I don't think James Daniels is even a top 5 paid guard. Maybe even not even top 10. I'd have to look it up. I think the Steelers, look, I know that the offensive line, the Steelers, all of us want this offensive line to be a top 5 group. They're not that yet. And I don't even know that with the personnel they have, they could be that. They're still going to have to upgrade. But for where they are as a team right now, I don't think the offensive line is holding them back from being that 30-point-a-game offense, right? I mean, this is what's going to help them be a 30-point-a-game offense is, number one, Kenny Pickett and his growth and development. Number 2, I think it's their ability, you know, and this is going to be more of an offensive coordinator thing, but their ability to scheme up bigger plays. And by that I mean they just, you know, right now they rely so heavily on guys winning in one-on-one. And that's why they lack so much in yards after catch. That's a kind of a bigger discussion about coaching. But then I would say, okay, then, you know, beyond that, it's about this offensive line improving to the point where they could be a dominant group against anybody. You know, we'll all look back to that game against Baltimore and say, yeah, that was tough. That was tough because this offensive line did get beat up in that game, especially in the running game. This is not an offensive line that can impose its will against everybody just yet. Obviously, that's where we desire to be as a group. But again, the point of to go back to kind of the thesis of today. Has the improvements to the offense made it worth this kind of lack of, where are the Steelers right? Let's go to Tankathon and we'll look up where the Steelers are in the draft. Let's add this back. So the Steelers, I'll make this a little bigger. Steelers are what? The 13th overall pick right now. And I would imagine that they're going to win one or two more, right? I mean, you imagine that, let's say they beat Las Vegas on Saturday and then they split with the last two games. So that puts them at what, 8 and 9 on the year. I mean, very another 8-win year. Steeler fans are going to be very, especially the kind of the anti-Tomlin crowd, let's call them, are going to be very excited about that. Another 8-win year. But okay, so let's say that puts them, 13 to 15. Would you feel better if the Steelers had the 4th overall pick, but Kenny Pickett didn't look any better since the bye? The offensive line didn't look any better since the bye, and Najee Harris didn't look any better since the bye. What would you be, how are you going to solve all of the Steelers' problems because you have the 4th overall pick in the draft? Unless the idea is like, well, they're going to trade for number 1 and like take another quarterback, right? You're just going to roll the dice on another quarterback. But again, there's you've wasted so much capital. Even a guy like Bryce Young can't fix all the other problems that you have, right? You still have a running back problem. You still have an offensive line problem, and then you have all these holes defensively. So again, I think for me, as what I'm evaluating from this point forward, wins and losses are fine. Whatever. For me, it's about how they're winning football games. It's about the play on the field, especially of this offense. That's what I'll be watching. That's what I've been watching since the bye week. I've stayed pretty consistent on that. Defensively, again, I think the problem for this defense right now is that they're good, they're not great. I mean, this is a good defense. They play well, but you just can't. The problem for them is great defenses, the best Steeler defenses, you can trust in every situation. When you look back to those truly great Steeler defenses, when it was crunch time, when it was like, all right, we need to stop here, you got stops. This Steeler defense, we need to stop here. I mean, you go back to that loss against Baltimore, right? Needed to stop there. Give this offense one more chance. Couldn't do it. And in fact, allowed points. So, all right, let's get some of your comments here. Yes, forgot to talk about this at the beginning of the show. How could I forget? Yeah, what a tragedy that Franco passed away. I guess it was late last night. I mean, especially this week. Franco's an awesome dude, and the fact that they moved his statue. Anyone who's ever been to that airport, you go past it. It's such a legendary play. He was such a legendary guy within Steeler lore. All the stories about him, and it's been cool today to see all the players and everyone around Pittsburgh tell their stories about Franco, because he's a great Steeler, and he certainly is legendary for the immaculate reception, everything he did for the Pittsburgh Steelers on the field. But he's been a guy, when you think about the Pittsburgh Steelers, when you think about Pittsburgh as a city, you think about Franco Harris because of the person, not just the player. And so, what a tragedy, especially given that this was the week they were, it was going to celebrate him and that accomplishment and that play and all of that. It's gonna be a different vibe to Saturday's game now. It's still, I think it's still going to be a celebration. Obviously, we should celebrate, but it's not just going to be about the play anymore, right? It's about the man himself, celebrating his life. All right, Amos, Big Tone is back. Yeah, I'm back. I told you, I can't promise that this is ever going to be a weekly show. Again, the life happens for me. I give you a little backstory. I am a computer programmer by day, and I took a freelance job that ended up kind of spiraling into like, hey, crazy deadlines, and just didn't leave a whole lot of time for things like this. But anyway, great one here. Ooh, I kind of like this one. He says, next year, there's going to be a flip. Our offense will be good, and our defense might take a step back. Take a step back from this year, right? I mean, like, well, how do you guys grade the Steelers over the last 2 years defensively? Like, where would you, if you had to use, good, great, average, bad, very bad, right? Just kind of like a very generic scale, or A through F, I guess. how would you grade the Steelers over the last 2 years defensively? Considering that last year, everything that happened in the run defense and how poor they were. And then this year, for me, the problem for me this year has just been a general lack of consistency. Obviously TJ going down hurt a lot, and it hurt specifically the pass rush. But there's also, I talk about this a lot, complementary football. People get on the Steelers offense a lot of saying like, oh, the Steelers offense isn't helping the defense. That's true. No doubt about it, especially early on in the year. But what started to happen since this offense kind of had this resurgence, right, is we have a lack of complementary football in the other way. How many times do the Steelers score a touchdown or score points, and then the defense immediately gives it up? And when you think about what this defense should be, that stuff is unacceptable to me. I mean, look, and it's equally unacceptable like when the defense has a dominant performance and they're holding teams to 10 points, right? And this offense is just scraping by with 3 turnovers, like what happened in week 1, right? That's equally unacceptable. But yeah. Anyway, as far as this, like the defense might take a step back. I don't know. I could see them kind of leveling out to where they are now. Obviously a healthy TJ Watt next year is going to just immediately make a massive impact over where they are. I see what you mean though, as far as you start working in young talent. In the long run, that will probably play itself out well. The Steelers do a very good job of drafting, and we've seen that. But in the short term, obviously, you could take a very highly touted defensive tackle, and he may struggle early on in his career. So, and that may, of course, lead you to more of a step back defensively. Amos says Steven Sims not being back is fine because we have Calvin Austin. Yeah, and it's interesting because I kind of joked with Dave over at Steelers Sanctuary on that show today. It's interesting how much the Steelers are kind of manufacturing touches for a guy like Steven Sims, and then when you imagine the skill set that Calvin Austin is going to bring to the table, it does have to excite you a little bit, right? I mean, the idea that all the kind of end around stuff that Matt Canada wants to do, but even just kind of working him in on easy throws and trying to get him into open space. That's not going to work for Calvin. It's just unfortunate that he has. I believe the injury was a foot injury that he had, right? Obviously, for a guy like Calvin, whose whole game is around his speed and agility, you just any kind of lower body injury there kind of has to raise a little bit of a flag because that's where his whole skill set lies. In 1 year, is there even the possibility of re-signing and retooling the defense? Well, again, yes, because I think the core is still there. Right? I mean, again, you still have a core of great talent defensively. You're still going to have TJ Watt at that edge rush spot. So as long as he can, again, it's about his health. But let's say he's healthy for a 16-game period, which I don't think is unreasonable to say. Okay, you got great pass rush. And Alex, and what Alex Highsmith has shown this year, again, he's been very, very solid, double-digit sacks. Excited about what he can do in the future. And then you still have Minkah Fitzpatrick on the back end there. Look, they're going to have to retool the corner room. That's just going to have to happen. They're going to have to retool a lot of that defensive line. That's going to have to happen. And at the linebacking core, I would imagine that it's going to be very easy for them to just say, well, let's just, because of what they're going to have to do to the corners and because of what they're going to have to do to the defensive line, they can just bring back Myles Jack and Spillane. I don't think the Steelers are going to, in 1 year, go back to 2018, 2019 style of defense. I mean, I don't think that next year's team, we're going to go bang, right back to top 5 stuff. I think the top 5 nature, like this whole, like, they're going to be dominant defensively, I think that's over for a little bit. 2 years, right? Maybe, right? I mean, at least. Well, 2 years at least, let's say. Because, again, you're going to bring a lot of young talent in here, and all that young talent has to work out and be consistent. So you can, in 1 year, I think they can stay at this level or potentially be even a little better. Imagine that they get a player as a young player who works out, right? Let's say they get a young corner who proves to be very early on a starter capable player. I mean, let's be quite honest. They don't really have that kind of guy today. All the corners that they have, Cam Sutton being the best one. Cam's a very good corner. Levi Wallace is a good enough corner given certain limitations. And then Arthur Maulet, is very good at like one specific skill set, which is being around the line of scrimmage and making plays there. But once you put him in coverage, all bets are off, right? So could the Steelers upgrade at corner next year? Sure. I mean, if they get a young corner who can play, that's an upgrade at the corner spot, considering what they have right now. So I don't imagine there's going to be this massive fall off defensively. I just think our perception of what this defense should be, we're not going back there anytime soon. The Bengals O-line is still not great for what they did. Yeah, I mean, I agree. And this is why, this is why we're never, Steeler fans are never going to be the ones to celebrate in March, right? Or April. The Steelers are never going to be the ones in free agency who are going to be doing the victory laps. Like, oh, can you believe who we signed? It's on now. Like, again, the Bengals spent a ton of capital getting that offensive line back into shape. And they were very, very excited about it. Articles were written. PFF said, oh, the Bengals are like a top 5 offensive line right now. Never seen these guys play. They retooled 4 of their 5 starters. The Bengals did. Never seen them play, and PFF put them top 5. The Steelers are never going to be that team. Because, again, what did the Steelers do this offseason? They signed Mason Cole, a cast-off of the Vikings, who had never really been a quality starter in Minnesota. James Daniels, who was a nice young piece, but, again, not really thought of as a great talent. And they re-signed Chuks Okorafor, who, again, the best you can say about Chuks is that he's decent enough, right? Probably not the player they drafted him to be. This is what the Steelers did in the offseason to retool their offensive line. No one was writing about, oh, the Steelers, they've upgraded here, right? This is a significant upgrade. But I think what we're seeing now, when you go back to what the offensive line was a year ago and what it was for the first 10 weeks of this season, and now what we started to see out of it these last 6 weeks, it may not be top 5, top 10 just yet, but it's a significant upgrade. And they didn't spend a whole lot to do this. That's why we're again, I always laugh when we get to April, right? And we're doing AFC North talk, and everyone's saying, oh, what are the Steelers doing? What are the Steelers? I can't believe they're not doing this. I can't believe they're not spending guys here, right? I hate to use the line, but trust the process, right? I mean, as Steeler fans, I think we've all learned. Trust the process. Because the process, it generally works. Trust that this team is going to nail the draft, the majority of it, right? I mean, obviously they've had their swings and misses. And that the free agents that they're going to bring in, especially the ones like a Mason Cole. I mean, a Mason Cole is that is such a Kevin Colbert signing. This under the radar, no one cares about it. It is it's not leading SportsCenter. It may not even make SportsCenter. But at the end of the day, I think we're all looking back at Mason Cole and saying, man, that's a super solid signing. That's solid. Not a great player. But considering where they were a year ago, remember Kendrick Green? Boy, what an upgrade Mason Cole is. Let's see. Devin says we need Ringo or Joey Porter Jr. I think look, Joey Porter Jr. is such an easy comp to the Steelers because I mean, it's family, right? It's family. By all reports, I remember back in the day when Joey Porter was a coach on the Steelers. I believe him and Tomlin were good friends too. Like they would go to their kids' basketball games together and whatnot. So, I mean, that's an easy comp. I mean, Joey Porter, former Steeler. Joey Porter Jr. is a good quality physical corner, the kind that the Steelers like. I think Ringo, though, is probably just gonna crush it from an athletic profile standpoint. And you just can't go wrong taking a Georgia defender. I think we've learned this, right? You look at the Georgia defenders from a year ago. And people talk about Trayvon Walker as being a disappointment. Only a disappointment because he's a number 1 overall pick. Right? It's just a weird year where there wasn't a true elite number 1 prospect. But I think Trayvon Walker's been fine. But then you look at like Quay Walker in Green Bay. You look at what Jordan Davis has done in Philly. Yeah, I mean, you can't go wrong. You really you can't go wrong drafting a Georgia defender. Leo says, looking at the starter list, Witherspoon drop off is crazy. I mean, yikes. He is back next year. He's on the roster, right? If we go back to that spreadsheet that I made, There's I guess the possibility of just kind of slot in a kilo again. I talked with Dave about this on the Steelers Sanctuary podcast, and I don't want to just kind of like eat his content, right? Because I mean, you guys should go listen to that show. But we did talk about this a little bit. If you were going to keep one, who would you keep between Ahkello Witherspoon and Levi Wallace? I think I'd keep Levi. I know Ahkello has the more natural athletic profile of a player who should be a number one type. But man, he got crushed this season. Obviously, the hamstring injury hurts him, but it kind of helped the Steelers, to be quite honest. Didn't the hamstring injury low key kind of help the Steelers? Because as much as you'll say about James Pierre, and he's not, James Pierre is certainly not all I made him out to be back in the day. He's not an awful player. Whereas I think, man, when Ahkello was bad, Ahkello was bad. Great One says we're only getting one new O-lineman, probably a left tackle. I could see them upgrading over left tackle, but man, you're 2 years into Dan Moore, and I don't think Dan Moore has done anything. It's a weird spot because I don't think Dan Moore has done anything where you're like, you have to get rid of him, right? I think Dan Moore has spent 2 years, and I think each year he's kind of gotten each year better than the last. But I understand that, I mean, again, if the Steelers have a chance to get Skoronski, if the Steelers end up picking 11th or 12th, and Skoronski's there, the guy from Northwestern, one of these can't miss tackle prospects, you're not going to get an argument from me yep, sign me up. But again, that's the case that I want. I don't want the Steelers, if we get into this spot where, let's say it's the 15th overall pick, and it's they could take this small school guy and he's got some question marks here, kind of a raw prospect. No. The Steelers don't need to do that right now. We got so many issues. Let's go back over here. They got so many things to work on over here. I'm fine with one more year of Dan Moore. I don't need to take a flyer on a new Dan Moore. I'll take another year flyer on Dan Moore and hope that he makes another leap. That's where I am right now. Noah says probably should add another wide receiver. Yeah, you could. I've made this argument a couple times. I'll make it here today. I think you could add another tight end, especially given how well the Steelers have done in 12 this year. I've said this before, the kid from Notre Dame, obviously first round type prospect. You took a tight end with the first round this year. Steeler fans are just going to, full on brain explosion. Can't do that. But there's a kid, Darnell Washington from Georgia, something like that. I think there's the opportunity to to sprinkle in. The Steelers are going to have 3 picks in the top 45, 4 picks in the top, probably 70. Could one of those be a tight end? Maybe. I think wide receiver is another one where you could make the argument that, hey, another late round type prospect, 4th, 5th round type dude. Sure. I think Miles Boykin is probably back. He's been such a good special teamer. They're going to lose in all likelihood Benny Snell next year. So they're going to lose, what is essentially a core special teamer. Gina says, glad to see you're back. Glad to be back. Glad to be back again. Can't promise consistency. I'm going to try. But and we are getting to the part of the season where again, we start to daydream about 2023. Tony's brain gets excited, so you'll probably see more of me. George says, you mean scheme receivers open? I do mean scheme receivers open. It's look, and I don't want to just, I don't want to bash on Matt Canada because he has done a better job since the bye. And there's no doubt about it, right? There's more usage of the middle of the field since the bye. Look, there's still a reliance on guys winning in one-on-one. That's for sure. But I don't want to just be no, Matt Canada is just a bad offensive coordinator. I mean, look, would I still replace Matt Canada? Would I still look to upgrade this offseason? I probably would, but I get it. Tomlin's a more results-oriented guy. The fact that the offense has gotten better is going to likely mean that they're going to keep Canada, especially because they don't fire coaches and he likely has a 3-year deal. So next year would be year 3. I'm not going to beat myself up. I'm not going to let myself get beat up by the fact that Canada's likely back next year. 2020, they were great, but declined because of injury. 2020 was, that's the COVID year. Boy, they were, they were not good at the end. Okay, I'll agree with you. Okay. They declined because of injury. What were the injuries at the end of the year? Hayden was one of them, right? Hayden didn't play in that playoff game late. Remind me of the injuries that year. Getting old. Brain's not what it used to be. Memory's not what it used to be. Last year, they were okay with a great pass rush. No doubt about it. What would you say they are this year? Like, okay, are the Steelers even an average defense this year? Below average, average, above average? Where would you put them? I mean, I don't think you could say good or great. I mean, I just, I guess I did say earlier on the show, like, they're good, not great. But I'll probably put them like above average this year. Probably not good. Because they've lacked any sort of consistency in the pass rush. They're not turning the ball over. And as I said, like, as this offense, it just feels like, you have two things headed in opposite directions, right? You have the offense going down while the offense is going up. Defensively, I think we still have a core, so we can build back. Even if we do get a new corner and nose tackle, it's going to take time for them to develop. The fact that they might not even pay out. Exactly. I think that's exactly right. The core is going to be there, which should keep you at sort of a, like, boy, you're going to have a hard time putting together with a healthy Cam Hayward, a healthy Minkah Fitzpatrick, and a healthy TJ Watt. You're going to have a hard time being anything worse than average. So as long as they don't completely swing and miss, but Great Ones here is right, which is you need a level of consistency out of your young players. Help on the defensive line, have to stop the run, need some more help on the O-line for protection and to help the running game. Replacement for Bush. Can we get a number one corner? Right. Yeah, I mean, I think you hit it here though, which is look at what's happening here. This is why, again, I'm so excited about the offense. Because look at when we talk about the 2023 Steelers, we need help on the defensive line. You have to stop the run. I also think you need help on that defensive line to give you more consistency in the pass rush as well. But that's neither here nor there. But I agree with Aquatic Life here. Need help on that defensive line. Need to stop the run. Need a replacement for Bush. Yep, that's number 2 thing you need. Oh, and can we get a number 1 corner? That's 3 things you need. Now, okay, you need an offensive line. I agree. I mean, I still, again, it's a want, not a need. Because I need that defensive line to be better next year. Can't keep having this, right? I mean, again, we're losing Larry Ogunjobi. We're losing Chris Wormley. We're losing Tyson Alualo, although, Alualo maybe hadn't been great. We're losing Devin Bush. We could be losing Robert Spillane. We're losing Cam Sutton. So which of those 3 things, right? If I told you can only have 3 things, you can only have 3. You can either have D-line, you can have O-line, you can have corner, you can have linebacker. Which one falls off first? Does O-line, is an O-line a top 3 priority for you? Or does corner, D-line, linebacker come first? Because for me, right now, I might even put slot in there. I mean, I honestly, I might put O-line as like my 5th priority right now. I might say, okay, corner, D-line, linebacker, slot corner, nickel corner. What's a reasonable outlook for this upcoming draft? What is realistic draft-wise and free agents? I mean, I think the Steelers are going to have money to spend. Here's the thing, like a reasonable outlook and a realistic draft. Remember how fun it was when Ben retired? And after obviously we got over the sadness of like, oh my God, I can't believe Ben Roethlisberger retired. There was kind of a little bit of an excitement though of like, oh, they could do anything now. Could it be Malik Willis? I don't know. Could it be Aaron Rodgers? I don't know. Right? I mean, there was that kind of excitement of, wow, anything can happen now. There is also that kind of excitement when it comes to this free agency for me, because there's no more Kevin Colbert. It's Omar Khan and it's Andy Weidel. And I don't really know. I don't know what these guys are going to do. I mean, I think certainly what Omar has proved from a contract perspective over his entire career. Remember, this is the salary cap guy. That he was the salary cap guru for, forever here in Pittsburgh. We know that the contracts they're going to give out are likely going to be able to manipulate the cap in such a way that they will maximize the value year after year. They'll be able to maximize value year after year. So I think the Steelers are not necessarily going to put themselves into, cap hell or anything like that. So I think this team right now, I think they have something like $15-20 million in available cap space, but that's before doing any sort of restructures or, cutting players that are, guys like William Jackson III counts for what, $12 million on next year's cap. I mean, he's either gone or restructured. There's no way that's going to happen. So I think they're going to have enough cap space that they could go out. People talk about Javon Hargrave potentially coming back. Now, boy, I hope they don't try to use him at nose again, because that's silly. But I would love to see Javon Hargrave come back. And I think the Steelers could have the money to do that if they really wanted to. But I think the Steelers are probably going to enter into this thing defensively saying, we don't need to go out and spend like top dollar. Javon Hargrave is going to make top dollar on the defensive line. I don't know if they need to go out and do that again. They need what this team really needs is to be able to go out in this offseason and find some Mason Coles defensively. Right? Who is the Mason Cole that they can find at corner? Like, and really, they already have that in Levi Wallace. Because really, in the draft is where you need to go out and be able to get the extreme value. Right? This team needs a number one corner. You don't really want to pay for a number one corner right now because, boy, you're already paying for the number one safety and the number one edge rusher and one of the top paid D linemen already. You don't really want to have to go out and pay the number one corner either. So you'd like to be able to do that in the draft. So I think what you do in free agency is you pick and choose your Mason Cole types to kind of fill in. And then with these 3 picks in the top 45, you try to nail down those real positions of need defensively. Let me get the next great Steeler defensive lineman, the one beyond Cam Hayward. Let me go get the next great Steeler corner. And potentially, look, Myles Jack is under contract for next year. But I don't know that he's going to be here for longer than that. So probably linebacker is in there. That's why for me, it's like, O-line. Fred says, how many offensive linemen are we away from having a truly dominant run game? Because I think Najee and Warren can be a dominant duo. I agree with you. And I think they're 2. Upgrade at center, upgrade either tackle or guard. 2. Could they be a dominant run game with Dan Moore or with Kevin Dotson or with Mason Cole? Right? Probably not all 3. But one of the 3, maybe even 2 of the 3. Are they 1 away, 2 away? It depends on, again, what we need to see here is leaps, right? I think Mason Cole's good enough. But you could be a good offensive line with Mason Cole. I don't know that you'll ever be like the top in the league. But you drafted Najee Harris because this guy can create on his own, right? If Jaylen Warren behind a great offensive line could be great, but he's an undrafted guy. I drafted Najee because he's supposed to be able to make yards even behind a bad offensive line. So when does Najee enter into that picture of like he's going to be a top 10, top 5 guy? I mean, realistically, if I'm being honest, he never does. Look, the problem for Najee Harris, and this is going all the way back to Bama. He's not a big play guy. He never has been. He's not a dynamic playmaker. He's a very good between the tackles, making guys miss in a phone booth type of thing. But he lacks elite speed and he lacks that elite burst. And that stops him from ever being, a 20, 30, 40 yard. That's what, look, you look at his yards per carry. Even in this improved period since the bye week, has he averaged 5 yards? I think he averaged 5 yards a game once, or 5 yards a carry once. He just, and the problem for that is it's hard to average 5 yards a carry when your longest carry is 10 yards. You go look at like the Nick Chubbs of the world, the Jonathan Taylors of the world, right? The guys who are averaging 5 yards a carry. It's because they're able to break off those 20, 30 yard runs. Najee's not that guy. Amos says, who would you want to be the next OC next season if not Canada? I don't have names off the top, like off rip. But what I want is I want someone who is kind of a unique thinker. A Mike McDaniel type. Someone who's willing to say, we're going to zig when everyone else is zagging. That's the kind of type that I want. I mean, Matt Canada it's a very simplistic offense that tries to do, very few things, but do them well. I want someone who's going to be putting defenses on their heels and not on their toes. And it's like a very simplistic way of putting it, but I don't know. I'll have to look around the league at who is the offensive coordinator right now for Minnesota? I guess it's O'Connell, right? I mean, a lot of these guys are already taken. Right? You look at who are the offenses that really impress you? Who's getting more out of the talent that they have than they should? And how do you go get that guy? And then again, it's when you're getting the next OC, who's going to come here on a lateral move? So you probably have to get a position coach, and this is where it becomes really hard, right? Me sitting here in Orlando trying to scout out who the next great Steeler OC is going to be is tough. All right, Noah, these are the players that were hurt. That's right. Bud Dupree, that's right. Bud Dupree went down. Yeah, that was huge injury in 2020. That's right. Devin Bush, but they were dealing with that Devin Bush thing all year. Wasn't it? Oh, you know what it was? It was Spillane came back right after injury. He was playing through a knee injury. Hayden was hurt. I do remember this now. I do remember that now. Yeah, and then so Aquatic Life, yeah, it says, this goes back to when I asked him, because he wrote in, Aquatic Life wrote in and said, there's 4 things the Steelers need to upgrade. D-line, O-line, linebacker, replace Devin Bush, and then a number 1 corner, right? And what I said is, okay, but if you can only have 3 of those things, what do you want? And he's saying here, remove the offensive line, which is where I am as well. And that's why and again, this is why it goes back to that thesis. What's happened since the bye is a really good thing. You know what no one's talking about anymore? No one, and I was talking about this before. No one's talking about, hey, the Steelers need to, potentially look at upgrading over Kenny Pickett. That's not happening anymore. So, yeah, and same thing with running back, right? I mean, no one's arguing should Jaylen Warren start every week? No one's saying that. Okay. I think we're about in an hour, and you guys know me. I like to wrap it up at an hour. So let's call it here. I appreciate everybody for watching today. Make sure you like the video on your way out. And if you're not subscribed to the channel, what are you doing? Subscribe to the channel. I'll be back, hopefully sooner than later. Maybe do a recap here of Steelers Raiders Saturday night. They're celebrating the Immaculate Reception, of course, celebrating the life of one of the great Steelers and the great people in Pittsburgh of the Pittsburgh Steelers, Franco Harris, who passed away last night. So I'll be back next week to recap that game right here on Steeler Country.